All right, and good morning, and welcome to Friday, August the 6th today. And we got today and tomorrow still to spend with Paul's encouragement and instruction to two young pastors, Titus and Timothy, and to the churches that they pastor as well. It's not just about those two men because the church is a whole thing, not just relying or dependent on one individual. So good advice, good devotions this week for those in leadership and those who work with them and who act as their her and Aaron, as Moses had, holding up his arms for prayer as Israel battled. Every leader needs support and encouragement, and it's a team. It's a team. Resisting the pressures of the world. That's today's devotion. The suggested reading is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 17. And the lead-in verses today come from 13 and 14 of that passage. Evil men and impostors will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. But as for you, Timothy, continue in what you have learned. Paul's second letter to Timothy was his last, written shortly before his martyrdom. His main concern is still what will happen to the gospel when he will no longer be there to guide and teach the church. In 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, Paul warns Timothy that the last days, which Jesus inaugurated, would include terrible times. And he goes on to give a vivid sketch of them. He lists 19 characteristics, the most striking of which is misdirected love. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure instead of lovers of God and of goodness. Or lovers of pleasure. I just read that part. Instead of lovers of God and of goodness. Indeed, society will be without love. This absence of authentic love will sour people's relationships. Paul is afraid lest Timothy be swept away by a torrent of self-centeredness, and he urges him instead to stand firm and resist the pressures of the prevailing culture. Those words to Timothy then are just as current, just as important. The reality is the same. And certainly we are living in a time when people are lovers of self, lovers of money, and lovers of pleasure. That's what many live their lives for. They're idols that we in our culture continue to worship, not much different than Paul's days and Timothy's days. In 2 Timothy 3:10 and 14, Paul twice addresses Timothy with the same two little Greek monosyllables, su de. S-U, one word, D-E, the next. Don't know Greek, probably mispronounce them. Su de, meaning, but as for you. But as for you. In stark contrast to contemporary culture, Timothy is to be different, and if necessary, to stand alone. Paul describes Timothy's position in terms of a following of Paul, especially of his teaching and his manner of life. Then he exhorts Timothy to continue in the same path, continue in what you have learned. Thus, verses 10 through 13 describe Timothy's past loyalty to the apostle, and verses 14 through 17 urge him to remain loyal in the future. He has good reason to do so, partly because he knows from whom he has been learning, namely Paul, whose apostolic authority he has come to accept, and partly because he has known the Holy Scriptures from childhood and accepted them as literally God-breathed, Theo Nostros. I shouldn't try. God breathed and profitable. The same two grounds apply today. The gospel Christians believe is the biblical gospel, vouched for by both the prophets of God and the apostles of Christ. We are thankful for this double authentication. Great devotion, great encouragement. It shows, though the Bible was written hundreds of years ago, even the New Testament 2,000 years ago, relatively. And yet, what it has to tell us, what it has to say to us, is just as current. 19 characteristics of misdirected love. Lovers of self, lovers of money. These aren't all of them. Read the passage, 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 17. Lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure, without love. The absence of authentic love will sour people's relationships. If that is not what we've seen over the last year and a half to 2 years put on steroids, that's what we've seen. Lovers of self. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you need. I don't care what you think. I care about me. And I care about those who are like me. That's our nature. That's our culture. That's the time in which we're living. And that's just the way it's going to be. And so Paul is saying, Timothy, you be different. Christian, you be different. We are to be different from this world. For if we are pretty much the same, what can we call people to? What can we share with them that's different and fresh and more powerful than this selfishness of our culture and of our age? Christian, be different. Follower of Jesus, be different. That makes you different. Different from this world and all that they follow. We have a responsibility to be different, not weird, not saying and doing things that are just look like craziness, but living a different kind of life with different values, different priorities, so that, as Paul will say in another passage, when people look at you and they see the way you live and they see the way you handle life, the difficulties of life, be ready to give them a reason when they ask why you have the hope you have. And it's all about Christ. Blessings to you today.